Chapter 31. I haven't always been a Wishtree. It happened in 1848, long before I was surrounded by concrete and cars. When I was just a few decades old, still a youngster by Red Oak standards, no longer a lanky sapling. I was solid and strong, but not anchored to the earth the way I am now. This was a time, like many other times, when hungry, desperate people sailed on crowded boats to settle here. Many of them ended up, as they always seem to, in my neighborhood. The blue and green houses were brown then, and filled to overflowing with new arrivals. Sometimes the newcomers were welcomed, and sometimes they were not, but they still came, hoping and wishing, as people always do. One of our new residents was a young Irish girl named Maeve. She voyaged across the Atlantic with her 19-year-old brother, who died of diphtheria during the trip. Their mother had passed away shortly after Maeve was born, their father when the children were 9 and 12. Maeve was solid and plain, but when she smiled, it was like sunshine peeking through the clouds. She had a deep laugh, and her hair was a brilliant red, as my finest autumn attire. 16, alone and penniless, Maeve shared a tiny room with 5 other immigrants. She worked night and day, cleaning and cooking and doing whatever she could to stay alive. Maeve soon discovered she had a gift for caring for the sick. She had no special knowledge, no secret remedies, but she was kind and patient, and she knew how to soothe a fevered brow with a cool cloth as well as anyone. What she didn't know, she was willing to learn. As time passed, word grew of Maeve's ability. People brought their sick piglets and their lame horses, their coughing children, and their fruitful babies. Always, she explained that she wasn't sure she could help, but since people in the neighborhood were too poor to go to the doctor, they turned to Maeve. And since people believed she could help them get better, Maeve tried to live up to their hopes. When she succeeded, and even when she didn't, patients and their families would leave small tokens for her. A whittled figurine of a bird, a hairpin, half a loaf of bread. Once someone left a leather-covered journal with a tiny silver key that opened its lock. When Maeve was out tending to someone who was sick, people took to leaving their thank yous in my lowest hollow. It was still a fresh wound, just a couple of seasons mended, but because it faced the house where Maeve roomed, and not the street, it was a safe place to leave a token of gratitude. That's when I realized that hollows can be a good thing for people, not just birds and animals. Little did I know just how good. Chapter 32. The years passed, and Maeve became as connected to the neighborhood as I was. Even as newcomers from other lands landed their music and food and language to our little part of the world, no matter where the people were from, Maeve cared for them as best she could. I grew tougher and my older limbs less pliable, my shadows longer. More trees and shrubs joined me, but there was plenty of sun for all of us, and we never wanted for water. I hosted many families by then, mice and chipmunks in particular. My closest confidant was a young grayed squirrel named Squibbles. All squirrels named begin with the letters SQU. Squibbles was especially fond of Maeve, who often fed the little squirrels table scraps. Privately, Squibbles and I worried about Maeve, although along the way Maeve had seen a suitor or two, but nothing much came of those flirtations. She had friends aplenty and work to do from dawn till dusk. Still, she seemed lonely. Sometimes Maeve would sit on the porch steps watching happy families stroll past, and her eyes would well up with tears. At night she'd gaze out an open upper stairs window, and her sighs would float out to us on the breeze, melancholy as the call of a mourning dove. Often Maeve would sit at the base of my trunk and write in her journal. Now and then she'd read passages out loud. She spoke about the Irish countryside fading into the fog. She spoke about her family she'd lost. She spoke about her secret hopes and fears and longing. She had love to give and no one to give to. Maeve adored early mornings when the world was bathed in mist and the sun was still a promise. She would lean against my trunk and close her eyes and hum a tune from her childhood. One day, the first day of May, Maeve joined me at dawn. To my surprise, she reached up to my lowest bough and gently tied a scrap of blue striped fabric in a careful knot. "I wish," she whispered, "for someone to love with all my heart." That was my first wish and the beginning of many more. Chapter 33. As the weeks passed, the piece of fabric on my branch drew many comments. Some of the folks in my neighborhood, the ones from Ireland, would nod knowingly and smile. To them, Maeve would simply say, in her littling voice, "That's my raggy tree. She's not a hawthorn, but she'll do just fine." People who'd come here from other lands, and there were many of them, would frown at the rag or even reach up to remove it. Maeve would warn, "Don't be touching my wish now." Patiently, again and again, she would explain how in her old home leaving wishes on a raggy tree was a time-honored tradition. Now and then people would ask Maeve what she wished for. She'd tell them the truth with a sigh and a weary smile. Nothing much, just someone to love with all my heart, nothing much at all. Sometimes people would laugh, sometimes they would roll their eyes. "A wish on a rag won't bring you love, dearie," they would say. But usually people gave Maeve a kind smile, a squeeze on the arm, and a knowing nod. And then they, too, would ask if they could add a wish of their own. Chapter 34. Another year passed. As May neared, I found myself hosting many more scraps of fabric than budding leaves. Squibbles tried to steal a few fabric strips to line his dairy, the nest made of leaves and twigs high in one of the forked branches. I explained he'd have to stick with moss and pine needles until the 1st of May. Wishes, according to Maeve, could not be touched until after May Day. Then the ones that weren't carried off by the wind or dragged to the ground by the rain could be removed by people or by enterprising squirrels. I suspect she made up the rule for my benefit so I could grow unfettered, without the weight of wet rags dragging me down. Just before dawn on the 1st of May, a young woman approached me. She had dark wavy hair and wore a tattered gray coat. In her arms was a wrapped bundle. "Psst," Squibbles whispered to me. "Here comes another wish, Red." But Squibbles was wrong. This was no wish. Swiftly, with great care, the girl placed her bundle in my hollow. A thank you for Maeve, I realized. A loaf of bread, perhaps. The girl probably had been one of her patients. She was gone as quickly as she came. Like a hummingbird, I thought. Then not, like a gust of wind. Chapter 35. Just a few minutes later, Maeve opened the door of the little brown house. She smiled at me, and then the scraps waving in the early morning breeze. And then came the cry. Wail was more like it. Coming from me. Not the meek peep of a wren chicken, not the shy squeak of a mouse pup. No, this was a cry of the righteous indignation. This was a baby! Chapter 36. The baby had a note attached to her blanket. Haughtily, Maeve tried to read it out loud. "Italian," she murmured. Only later, when she consulted one of her patients, did she understand its meaning. "Please give her the care I cannot. I wish for you both a life of love." The baby's hair was black. Maeve's was red. The baby's eyes were brown. Maeve's were blue. The baby was Italian and Maeve was Irish. They were made for one another. Maeve named the girl Amorda, which meant in Italian, the gift of love. Chapter 37. Many in the neighborhood didn't approve of an unmarried Irish woman raising an abandoned Italian baby. People talked as they will, and they tisked as they must. Some people were even angry. They said hurtful things. They told Maeve that Admorda didn't belong. They told Maeve that she and the baby should leave. Maeve merely smiled, held her close, and waited and hoped. On dark nights, when hope was scarce, she would sing an old Irish tune mixed with a newer Italian song that she had learned from a neighbor. The melody was sweet, the words were silly, the effect always the same, a smile from little Amia. Sure enough, the longer Maeve waited, the kinder people grew, and before long, Mia, as she came to be called, was as much a part of our messy garden as all the rest of us. When Amia was old enough to feed Squibbles and his family, she did. When she was strong enough to climb me, she did. And when she was ready to make wishes of her own, she did. Amia grew up steady and honest and kind, like her mother, and had babies of her own, and then grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Eventually, Amia and her husband bought the little brown house, the one right next to it, and painted them blue and green. Years later, they purchased the house across the street and began to rent the blue and green house to other families. The family grew and prospered and argued and failed and loved and laughed. Always and forever, the laughter kept them going. And when Amia's grandson had a little girl, he chose a fine Italian name for her with an Irish middle name, Francesca Maeve. Chapter 38. As for me, my reputation grew. Hadn't Maeve's wish come true in the heart of a wish tree? Didn't that mean anything was possible? Of course, as Squibbles often reminded me, I had nothing to do with it. This isn't a fairy tale, Red, he would say. But people are full of longings, and decade after decade the hopes kept coming. A blessing and a burden it had all been, all those wishes, all those years. But everyone needs hope. Chapter 39. At long last I stopped talking. Once the words had spilled out, it was like trying to stop the wind. In the silence that followed, I felt as if the whole world was holding its breath. I had broken the rule. Stephen and Samar still stared open-mouthed at me. They looked as rooted to the ground as I was. Neither had uttered a sound while I told my story. The front door to Stephen's house opened. "Stephen?" called his father. "The heck are you doing, young man?" Stephen leapt to his feet. Here I come, Dad. Night, Samar." "Night, Stephen," she said. Stephen dashed towards the porch. He stopped halfway. He spun around to look at me. "Thanks?" he said in a quizzical voice, using the same tone he might have used if Bongo had just made him pancakes. The door slammed behind him. Samar stood holding her blanket to her chest. "I know I must be dreaming," she said. She headed to her own porch and eased open the door. "I just wish," she said with a smile, "that I didn't have to wake up." Chapter 40. Almost instantly, I regretted what I had done. I had broken the rule, the biggie. I had deliberately spoken to people. And not just a few words. I had spoken a river of words. I wasn't like the frog in the mailbox. I hadn't broken the rule accidentally. I had broke the rule because I wanted something. I wanted to matter. I wanted to do something meaningful before I died. I had done it for myself. After the shocked babies and their equally shocked parents were safely escorted to their dens, I admitted my feelings to Bongo. I waited for her to yell at me. Bongo is good at yelling, extremely good. You might even say she has a gift. "Why did I do it, Bongo?" I murmured. "Why?" She flew to home plate. She stroked my rough bark with her sleek head. "You did it, my wise old tree, because you had a story to tell." "It was foolish," I said. "I'm not supposed to be foolish." "Not so foolish," Bongo said. "Just hopeful. And everyone needs hope, Red, even wise old trees."